Welcome back to another special episode of Dungeons and Designers, where today we hit up the new update to One DnD. Last time we did this, you and I, Patrick, we covered what was called the Character Origins Edition, which was all about feats, the new backgrounds, how they're handling race in D&D, and now we're going to talk about the expert classes, an introduction to how they're going to handle spells, and some rules that they're going back on a little bit. Uh, I'm excited, man. Last episode I was like over the moon. I think everything they're doing is fantastic. I know there's a lot of weird hate on there, and there's a lot of people kind of just maybe worrisome about the changes they're going through. But they continuously tell us like these are just tests. Like this isn't the new rule set. Don't freak out. And I remember you and I last time, the big one was how they're going to handle inspiration, where it was like
Yes.
anytime you rolled a D20, they were just going to give inspiration, and they already rolled all that back. So I guess just before we start, and we have already sharing, I believe, the new expert classes, but before we get into that right away, one of the things that they already talked about was they released the new content, and then 2 weeks later they're going to open up the kind of feedback form.
Right.
I filled it out. I filled it out about 2 weeks ago. It's now down
40,000 people filled
40.
it out.
Yes,
Yeah.
40,000. Which is nuts. And I know you and I are talking about doing one-offs for the D&D stream, and I'm excited just to start playtesting this material. We didn't get to the last time, so I was just giving feedback based on the things I read and what I thought. And as we dig into this, I think you'll see, like, for a lot of this content, we really do need to play test it to have an opinion.
What's the likelihood that 38,000 of those were like just one really passionate person?
I mean, not zero, that's for sure. But I think people are just really excited, and I think it's a cool look into how to grow community, right? They could have just released 6th edition in 2025, which I think is when they said that this is all going to be wrapped up. But instead, we're going to go for a 2-year journey with them, and it appears that they're taking our feedback and immediately working it in, which is really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, maybe even like more quickly than I would have thought they would.
Yeah.
There's a certain percentage of playtesting that has to happen to validate beliefs, because it's not like the things that they formed came from nowhere. There was some felt need that made them believe this would be a positive step forward, that this would be a net benefit or a net good. So it's kind of surprising to me how quickly they're adjusting, but at the same time, that hopefully if you're so far a little uneasy or concerned about the direction, that should maybe make you excited that
Yeah.
they're showing that this is all held loosely. There's not a lot of ego behind this. They're going to react very quickly to the community.
Well, and I think something that has to be happening, because the forums went down like last week. There's no way they reacted to this content that quickly, right? Like this most recent set cannot be a reaction to the first. Like that's just impossible. So I think it has to mean that they're also monitoring Twitter, they're monitoring videos like what we're making here. Like they're hearing the voices and be like, okay, let's try something. Another thing they mentioned, and when I say they, I mean I think it was Jeremy Crawford, but it
Yeah.
might have been someone else. They also mentioned that they might try the same rule 3 or 4 different times, like in different versions, so that they can get feedback. So when we all reacted maybe strongly against how they were handling inspiration, they already knew, like, we have 2 or 3 different ways we're going to handle this, and we're going to see after everything how it kind of vibes with everything else. So are you ready to just jump in?
Let's do it.
Cool. So I went through this 37-page document, and I highlighted a few things that I thought were pretty important, things that kind of stood out to me. So the first big one is class groups. As it stands right now, there's just like a dozen different classes you can choose from. And then on top of that, all these different races. And when you're trying to balance your party, you kind of just go, all right, who's going to be the tank? Who's going to be DPS? Who's going to be healer, et cetera? Kind of like a wow effect, right? Like, how are we going to make this party? And what this kind of does is just it groups all of their different like base classes into those already kind of tank, healer, DPS roles, which I thought was super interesting. So you got your experts, which are the bard, the rogue, the ranger, kind of like I call these like our DPS, except bard's a little weird. But these all have expertise features, and they have all kind of magic stuff we'll kind of get into a little bit. Then you have your mages, who are like the pure arcana magic users, but focused, like it says here, on utility and destruction, while the priests are also using magic, but for divine and primal magic. So you got your cleric, your druid, your paladin, kind of what you expect. And then warriors are obviously going to be your barbarian, fighter, monk. And I think this makes a lot of sense, especially when introducing to new players. I think a lot of stuff we're going to read today is how do we introduce D&D to new players.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is pretty cool. What role are you normally playing in your party? Not just class, but if you had to like pick your group, does this kind of match what you expect your role to be?
Sure. It's prior to playing any D&D, I started with WoW back in vanilla, and I always gravitated towards a DPS class. I actually played a warlock at first and then switched to a mage. And so even when moving into D&D, my inclination was to move into a caster type. I will
Mm-hmm.
say that I found the caster types a little unsatisfying at lower levels, and so because of that, I moved into warrior type because everybody likes a good tank. That's also a lesson I took from WoW.
Yeah, I think so whenever I play D&D, I'm almost always the cleric. Normally cuz that's just the least wanted role and I don't mind playing the cleric. So it's a good but you do get used to like whenever you try to do DPS as a character, you'll go 4 or 5 turns like not hitting. You're just
Can't
like
do it.
this is
Can't
so
stand it.
frustrating.
Can't stand it. So
Yeah.
and so because of that, in playing the campaigns I play now, I tend to vacillate between either playing a barbarian or playing a paladin, just somewhere on one of those two. So
Yeah, so you'd be in here warrior. I think it might be interesting to know that paladin is under priests, but if you've played paladin, you get it. Like they are tied directly to their divine nature. When I DM paladins, I almost look at them like warlocks. Like warlocks have this innate connection with their patron, and if you make your patron angry, you lose your powers, right? Because that's where all your powers come from. And I think paladin should be handled often the same way as like if you go against your deity's wishes, like you should lose your smite, like you should lose all these things that they're giving you. So I think this breakdown experts is new, and the asterisks. I thought this asterisk was going to be about experts to explain what this was a little bit more, and instead they were already like, don't get angry that the artificer isn't here. Like the artificer isn't a base class. Don't get all huffy and puffy. I saw one person explain it online as like the artificer doesn't feel like the rest of the classes, right? Because it's all about building and like they have cannons and guns and droid robot type things. And they were like, these just belong in other books. This isn't a base class. It doesn't feel like normal D&D. So you'll see it's in Tosh's Cauldron to Everything and Ebron Rising from the Last War. What is interesting to me is if we are going back to these two books, how are they going to update for One DnD? Right? We no longer get our attribute bonuses from our class like you used to. You're going to get them from your background. So it's just interesting how they're still pulling from old and trying to integrate it to new when like core ideas are changing.
in practice, how do you think that affects gameplay or I guess in this case, character build?
Yeah, I think it's going to change a lot. So we had talked about this a little bit with, I believe it was one of the newer books. I can't put my finger on it. They changed it so that you could just change your attribute point bonuses no matter what. So if you were a gnome, you could be stronger than a giant, right? And
Right.
that always at its core like bothered me.
Right.
Not because I'm some sort of racist or anything. It just didn't make sense like in the world. Like we should, even if it's fantasy, there should be rules.
Well, and I'll say this too, because I also agree with this, but I agree with this. The perspective I always took on it was, the choices I make, I want them to have unique consequences, good and
Yes.
bad, because that makes me more valuable to a party. If we normalize these attributes and anybody can pick up some variation of that thing that I can do, then I'm no longer special to my group. I'm much more replaceable to my group, and it takes away these
Exactly.
unique things that can happen. So I think that that's good. I've always seen this happen in games that are trying to be more casual and have broader appeal, and I totally understand that, but I still don't like to see it taken away from everybody. You want to be able to put together those really, really weird or very, very interesting or those like fringe builds because they make for fun scenarios.
Yeah, and I think changing it so that your attributes come from your background instead, it allows you to play a a gnome warrior but bring in the background to explain why can your gnome swing a sword and wear
Right.
heavy armor, right? Like build it out. And I think that, to your point, is very special. Correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't played WoW since vanilla, pre Burning Crusade.
Been a minute, yeah.
Yeah, I heard some of what you're complaining about with like classes kind of blurring lines occurred in that game. Am I making that up?
Yeah, completely. I mean, it happened on multiple levels because you would have a talent tree that, depending on how you spec into, would obviously change the way what your character has access to, and how they function.
Sure.
And then you also, through your spells, you would have very specific spells. Like, it used to be that, if you wanted a lust mechanic, you had to have a shaman, or you had to have something like that. And then,
Yeah.
but what would happen, and we also saw this with gear. It used to be that there was a lot more variety in the type of gear you could wear, and how like specific the attributes were on the gear. In one case, it made a really cool scenario where, again, you could make these really weird builds that nobody else was using. They're like super situational, and that's fun. There was the flip side of it too, which is that you'd be trying to do like a 40-man raid, or like a whatever, and you just need like one character, and that character's not online on your server, and you just have to stand around because nobody has that character, and without that character you can't succeed. So again, the fun part is it makes people like very, very special, very unique, very important. The bad part could be that it could slow down some of those aspects of the game. And so
Sure.
again, I understand the give and take. There were some positive changes on the WoW side. In some cases, WoW became very uniform.
Sure.
And I think since then it's been a bit of a fight to maybe undo some of that. But there are some people that are know this subject way better than I do. I just play a
Yeah.
mage, so I only have to, again, I press 3 buttons and I'm done.
Well,
Way
and
easier.
what feels weird about this is, again, like WoW was fixing it because in a 40-man raid you need very specific roles, but in D&D you have a DM who's reacting to your players' choices, so already there's some flexibility. You're working with a limited party together, so you all know each other. So it does, and as we scroll down further, we'll see D&D is slowly making some of the changes you're talking about, and I'm not sure why. Right, like we already have a DM who can react that solves a lot of these
Yeah.
problems. So in here, and you'll see like I highlighted everything I was interested in. But we see for the bard, this new character, this new class kind of build for the bard. It says a bard's life is spent wandering across the land, gathering lore, telling stories, and living on the gratitude of audiences, much like any other entertainer, which is what I know the bard to be. But then it says, but bard's depth of knowledge, level of musical skill, and mastery of magic sets them apart. So right now, like, and bards have always had some magic ability, but like for Lathander's Ring, we were easily able to make a bard non-magic, right? Because all of their spells were very kind of like charismatic-y, performance-y. But now bard is going to be, it feels almost like a spellcaster, like sorcerer. Obviously not the same, but D&D is now pushing magic through bard, and we're going to see that other places as well, which I don't know. I mean, it's typical D&D. I'm more of a fan of like low magic settings, but I understand why they're doing it. So yeah, if we come down, and we're not going to look at everything because there's 37 pages is too much, but you can see a very typical build out like we've seen so far. I think it's pretty interesting. I think the bard looked cool and fun. Another one of those like peeve kind of annoyance things I have under the skills for the bard, it lists the 3 that you can choose, and then it goes, or choose whatever 3 you want. And it's just like, but why? Like, where's the limit? Where are the
Yeah.
rules? What makes a bard, and why are we able to just make it whatever we want? And then to talk about that magic effect, if we look down here at the heal, which is first level bardic inspiration ability, it says immediately after another creature within 60 feet, which is pretty far in D&D, of you that you can see or hear takes damage, you can use your reaction to roll your bardic inspiration die and restore a number of hit points to the creature equal to the number rolled. So already this bard is kind of starting to fill a healer role. You don't even have to see the person, you don't even have to touch the person, you're healing from afar. Kind of a healing words idea, but just I think even healing words, I thought you needed line of sight, and I could be wrong. I could be remembering that incorrectly, but just feels kind of weird. Like, what are we making this bard? Why does bard need magic? Like, why don't you just be a priest? But again, I don't play bards, so
Sure. I'm curious. So this is an interesting situation because you're right. Ultimately, with something like WoW, the game environment is making decisions as opposed to a DM who
Mhm.
can like subjectively, objectively, whatever.
Yeah.
Make changes, make decisions in the moment. And on top of that, D&D is a framework that really you can do anything you want to with. There's nothing that's said before today that you couldn't just make these decisions about the characters you were running in your party if you wanted to. There's
Right.
no, you're not going to get like an official letter from D&D, like a cease and desist, because your bard could heal someone from 60 feet away without having line of sight.
Yeah.
So I wonder how much of some of these changes are, if there's a percent of this change, it's just to give permission to groups that don't, that either because of a DM or because of personality or whatever, don't feel the permission to deviate from what's physically written on paper.
Right. And like, if anyone's ever followed our Lathander's Ring campaign, people know the way I DM is I love a strict rule set, and then I just break it whenever we need to. Like, we break
Right.
often, but there is that kind of rule set we can go back to. And what I'm a little worried about is that the more loose the rules get, and the more kind of just everyone can kind of do whatever they want, there is no way for the DM to be like, I don't want to play a game like this, right? Like, it's no longer the DM's power; it's everyone just has the option no matter what.
Sure.
Which again, if their goal is to introduce new DMs, this works, and I understand why. And I'll just be a bully sometimes, maybe when I'm just like, you can't heal him, you don't even see him. So if we keep going down,
Can
can see
your
right
bard
here.
just break a string? I'm assuming to heal someone, the bard has to play guitar. So just like you break a string.
So later, I don't know if I highlighted it or not. They gave you like, this is the bard's equipment. If you don't like the equipment, spend 100 gold however you want, right? Like, again, like, what are we doing? Why aren't we just building in some rules?
Yeah.
But because a bard could use their voice, they don't need to have an instrument, so they might choose their money spent on a giant sword or something instead. It's just silly. Like, and again, I'm probably complaining about things that will like very rarely happen. Like, a player to want to come in mid-max, I just wouldn't play D&D with someone like that. I want a player that wants to be a bard. If you don't want to be a bard, be something else. Like, that's fine. But here we go down to the spell casting, and we see something cool. Instead of picking from a bard's list of spells, you're picking from an arcane spell. And these were that groups we talked about on the last video, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later. But in addition to the schools like conjuration and divination and all those other schools of magic, they're now also grouped into these three categories, and arcane being one of them. So again, like we were comparing before, now bards don't have a bard specific list. They have the same list as anyone else pulling from arcane, which again seems to be blurring the role lines. First, it makes it easier, right? So if you played bard, you can probably transition to someone who's using the arcane list pretty easily. But for players like me, I'd rather have the bards have a very specific spell cast because they're very different than a sorcerer or someone else.
Sure.
But I'm sure it'll work out in the end, and we could still make D&D whatever we want in the end anyways. So I'm going to skip through. We don't need to look at all of this. So here at third level bonus proficiencies, it kind of highlights what issues I had earlier, where you could just pick whatever proficiencies you wanted, or pick it was like pick 3 or pick whatever, right? And here it says you gain 3 skill proficiencies in Arcana, History, and Nature. If you already have one of these proficiencies, choose a skill proficiency you lack and gain that proficiency instead. But if we can pick whatever 3 we want, there's a chance that we actually already have all these 3. And then is the DM going to like allow you to just pick 3 new ones? And then the question is like, well, who's going to pick these 3 at first? But it's like, then why are we getting them at all? Right? Like, these 3 do have a use. That's why we're getting them. There's a good chance that someone else picked them already. And it's just that kind of fluidness is hard to build rules for later, right?
Sure.
If you don't have that structure, what are they designing later? And it's just, again, probably little edge cases that kind of get weird for me, but I like a stricter build.
It might be a typo, but normally after a statement like this, it says, or do whatever you feel like doing. So it's possible they just left that out of this statement.
How many times in the new DM guild and players handbook be like, don't listen to your DM, just do whatever you want. Yeah. All right, so let's keep going down here. So when we talked about the ranger or the bard skill proficiencies, I actually love the way they did this. So it's you get athletics, stealth, survival, or choose 3 from this specific list, right? They understand that the ranger can be a varied class, right? Like, If we think about Legolas versus Aragorn, right? I would put them both in the ranger role of archery and kind of tracking abilities,
Right.
but they're totally different characters. This kind of allows you to choose like what kind of ranger do you want. It's not you can be anything, but you can have freedom. And I just think this is a better way of approaching player choice and allowing customization of roles.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to keep scrolling past all this really cool stuff. If you want to make a ranger, go ahead and read it all.
Now, this what they dropped today and what we're going through, how many
Hmm.
classes did they drop?
So they only dropped 3 classes, and each class has a subclass. So like on screen here, Hunter was the subclass for Ranger.
Okay. Okay. And they're
Uh,
just slowly rolling out more and more.
yeah, and they rolled out the expertise because this is like a new grouping. So there's a very good chance, in theory, that these are going to be the 3 that feel maybe the most different. And one thing I'm really excited for, if we do a one-off, I'm definitely going to force someone to play a ranger because ranger is often crapped on for being just an underpowered,
Okay.
underutilized role. And I think their goal in this was to try to make them feel a more rangery and b more useful. And if they can achieve both of those, similar to the first content drop, we talked about this a little bit in our last video, is the dwarf felt dwarfy. Like it felt more dwarfy than any D&D I've ever played, and it was awesome. And if they can get Ranger to feel the most kind of like dirt under their fingernails,
Yeah.
Ranger tracking, then I think it'll be really cool. And I just want to see like what does a level 1 to 3 Ranger feel like, and does it feel equal to the other party?
You're saying new D&D meta ranger.
I'm excited to see what they do.
Okay.
I mean, it could be terrible, right? But I'm excited to try it, and that's why we're not going into too much detail. We could easily sit here and like read all the 20 levels of feature editions, but I think a lot of this just has to be tested out.
And
Like,
let's be
go
honest,
play it.
your group is going to fall apart before you get to 20th level. So,
Yeah, keep that a mental note for that because I got a highlight later.
okay.
So we're gonna skip through this. The rogue seemed pretty straightforward. The biggest change I saw was just language changing, just to make things a little bit clearer. But rogue still feels very roguey. And if I think back to what we're playing currently in D&D, rogue does seem like the most defined, recognizable class in
Sure.
D&D. So it doesn't need that much changing. So we're gonna skip through here. Thief is the subclass you got for your rogue. And then for feats, so we got a whole bunch more feats. Again, feats are going to be a big role in this new character creation, and they included a ton of the 4th level feats. If you kind of know how 4th level feats work now in current D&D, you usually either choose your attribute bonus, where you pick 2 points to go to 1 skill proficiency, or you pick 1 point to go to
Right.
2. Or you can do the variant of picking a feat. And I think this has confused a lot of people. I'm always one to choose a feat. I think it's just more fun. It makes your character feel new rather than just better. But it's confusing to people. So now they're going to put this kind of addition of attribute points into the feat. So we're going to see a feat later. I think I highlighted it where it's just add 2 or 1 to 1 and 1 to another. So it's just clear when you hit level 4, come here and pick a feat, and then you get to pick a feat again later. It might be 8, I can't remember.
Okay.
But right here, here's the thing I meant to keep that mental note. Bonus feats at 20th level. If you somehow get a party passing 20th level, every 1,000 points, give them a new feat.
Yeah.
And I was just like, who?
Yeah,
Who's
when you're 50 years old and you've been playing since you were in your high school D&D club, you could
Yeah.
maybe leverage this.
There's also like an inside D&D joke that once you hit level 20, you're supposed to be near god level. Like
Right.
your character has now ascended to a god. And the level 20 always feels a little bit underpowered. Like all that work to get this. And what they're saying is like, well, at level 21, just pick a feat. You could pick any feat, but there's like there's a certain set for 20th level, and they also feel fairly like,
Yeah.
all right. But it's just a funny, like when I saw that, I was like, who's playing that much D&D on one campaign, one character? I don't have characters last that long; they die.
Yeah, I
So
mean, you genuinely have to just roll a campaign at like level 15 and start
with a
working.
DM who refuses to kill.
Yeah.
So it was pretty fun. But here's that ability score improvement. So you increase 1 ability score of your choice by 2, or increase 2 ability scores of your choice by 1. You can't increase any ability score above 20. Um, So that's what we are used
I
to
see.
playing, but now
Right.
it's just a feat. You pick it, it's repeatable. So anytime you get a feat, you can just grab it again.
That
Pretty
makes
cool.
sense. That makes sense. That's very
Makes
logical.
perfect
Yeah.
sense. Little things that annoy my like anal brain is you can't increase an ability score above 2. You can increase it by 1 to a maximum of 20. Like, let's just pick one way of saying the same thing, guys. Like,
But that's editing. They'll get to this isn't
yeah, yeah.
final.
I'm hoping on the form they're like, comparing Charger to ability score improvement, how did you like us saying they could only go to 20? Pick one of the ones you liked. So I'm just going to go through all these feats. Again, if you're making characters, come here, spend time and read all these feats. They seem really cool, really interesting. A lot of them are inspired by the current feats, but there's a whole bunch of new. Here, these epic boon feats are the ones I was talking about for 20th level. So, epic boon of combat powers, you would get it at 20th level or 21, depending on if you keep playing. And it says when you miss with a melee attack, you can hit instead. Once you use this benefit, you can't use it again until you roll initiative. But at level 20, who's missing? It's just like, but it's like
I wouldn't
funny. And
know.
yeah,
I've been a level 2 for years now.
I think the highest I've ever been is like 13, and I've played D&D for 15 years. Like, it just doesn't, I start over too much. So yeah, a lot of really interesting, cool feats. I'm excited for it. I mean, the more I read this, the more I really want to get some one-offs to test this material because it just seems really fun. Keep scrolling. So here we come down to the spell list, and this is what we were talking before. Last time we did this video, they were split up into these three sections or groups called Arcane, Divine, and Primal. And I was a little confused because we already have schools. You can see here that spells are split up into. But now we saw that the bard gets to choose from arcane spells. So instead of having bardic spells, you go to here and you can choose any of these. So for some reason, theoretically, a bard can cast Firebolt as a cantrip. There's also talking about weird definitions and keeping things consistent. You'll see level 0 and cantrip used like throughout the document. And for anyone, I think you can quickly understand level 0 is a cantrip. It doesn't cost any spell slots, but we used cantrip as a term so that there was no confusion on how many level 0 slots do I have, right? That cantrip word I think was a clarification. So it seems like a little interesting to start going back a step. But again, editing and the people reading this are like the D&D nerds, right? So they're
Yeah.
not worried too much about things being perfect. It's let's get this tested. And I mean, every month it seems like we're getting new stuff to test. So here's your giant spells. Most of them are the same. When I get down here to the rules section, they have a section you'll see if I can find one, bark skin. So there are some spells that they're redefining. But let's go down here to this highlight I've added. D20 tests. The term D20 test encompasses the three main D20 rolls of the game: ability checks, attack rolls, and saving throws. If something in the game affects D20 tests, it affects all three of these rolls.
Okay.
So that's standard.
Sure.
Whenever you play a character whenever your player character rolls a 1 for a D20 test, that character gains heroic inspiration. So in the last set, as anytime you rolled a 20, you got inspiration. People are like, that's too much. You're already getting a double damage, or you're automatically passing a save. And now they're like, all right, well, what if we give it to the 1 so that's not all bad for them? And I enjoy a 1 roll. I roll them all the time. So like I don't need it. I don't need a nice win. Like, it can just be a goofy fail.
Yeah.
Uh, so again, they
And
were
that's more of
painful.
that's a DM discretion thing too. Like there's a part of me in my campaigns that, of course, like you're always trying to roll high. There's a part of me that will get excited about a 1 just to be
Yeah.
like, oh, what's the DM gonna say happens to me this time?
Yeah, and again, like we were talking about our discussion earlier, it's really the DM holds or puts in the power, right? I never, when someone rolls a 1, I never do you swung your sword too hard and you hit yourself, right? Like, I never, and I very rarely have them attack a player. In fact, usually when it's usually like someone shooting, and I'm like, hey, like, there's a person right there. If you roll 1, you're going to shoot them, right? Like, I give that warning up front just so they don't feel like I'm attacking them when they roll a 1.
Yeah.
I would assume this is for those DMs who are just cruel, right? And
Right.
and maybe that should be a paragraph in the DM's guide instead of trying to fix the rules. I don't know. It's very interesting. But if we go back, and hopefully I still have this. Nope, I don't. I had all this ready, and now I don't. I must have reloaded. But with the new rules, and this is the last set of content we got from them. But in the rules, it explains that a 20 is always a success and 1 is always a fail. And monsters the DM controls can't fail or can't get a success, a critical success. So this actually doesn't replace all of that; it just builds on. So if it's a 1, so right here it says when the character rolls a 1 for a D20 test, the character gains, and that's automatically a fail, no matter what bonuses you're adding. So we just have to keep in mind that when we're reading these sections in chunks, that it's not replacing the content before.
Right. It's
That
it's
this
an
is built.
addendum, but it's not new.
Yeah, I had a deranged thought earlier that I might take these two PDFs and start stitching them together so I can have one. And then I was just like, oh, how lonely must I be? So yeah, we have all these rules, and you'll see most of these rules specifically are for the 3 new classes. So, and we're going to see that a lot. So any spell that has flying, they have to define flying again. Climbing, because the rogue has second level, like they can climb second level story buildings. So like we have to define all those. Any new spells, grappling's always a confusion one. Even for me, I'm always like, how does grapple work? And then I make up something on the spot. So it's cool to have this little defined section here. So here's just a couple more. So they talk about heroic inspiration in more detail here. It's not just the 1. So character gains heroic inspiration if the character rolls a 1 for a D20 test, which we just covered. The DM can also award heroic inspiration to a player character who's done something that's particularly heroic or in the character. So this is what we currently have, this
Right.
role-playing idea or kind of cool moment idea. And now they're just adding this 1. I thought what was interesting was it says that 1 must be on the D20 used for the test total. And that wording confuses me a little bit because you would always add your attribute bonuses, except for the fact that if we go back to the character origin module, 1s just automatically fail. So it's just
Right.
weird wording. I'm not sure. Like you would never actually just roll a 1. Like that doesn't happen.
I feel like the point of that statement is just to say it can't be on a reroll for a test. It has to be on the initial roll. But I agree using because that's what it goes on to say. But
Sure.
I agree saying the word total kind of insinuates that you add things together, which would make you think that you add the attributes to it.
Yeah, and even the idea of like you can't re-roll it seems weird because usually it says re-roll and whatever the new number is the number you have. So in my mind, like you are risking it being worse. But it's okay. Like there's no reason for us to get mad. This is the second attempt at how does inspiration work. Obviously, someone at Wizards thinks DMs like me weren't giving enough inspiration on account of I don't think I've ever really given out inspiration. And they're going to try all the things they can. This is cool. This is actually so. Last time I was like, they're changing the rules because people can't read. People just need to read the rules better, and then they'll just understand how to play the game. And then I was like, hey, dang, is there an idea of influence in current D&D? And there is. Evidently, I just need to read the rules. But it was kind of a cool idea of just like, hey, we're going to put in a system of when you're trying to convince an NPC or you're trying to do animal handling, what does that look like? How can you more properly attack that and handle it? So we have these 3 different attitude categories: indifferent, friendly, hostile. And I think just by reading those, we understand, like if you're trying to get an enemy NPC to do something, they're hostile. If it's a friendly dog, it's indifferent or friendly. And if it's indifferent, it's just like someone walking by who doesn't care about you at all, right? Like we understand this. But the one cool thing they've done, and as a DM, I've never done this, is they're setting multiple DC checkpoints. So if you roll a 10 on a indifferent creature, the creature does as asked as long as no risk or sacrifice is involved. And if they roll a 20, which is twice as good, the creature accepts a minor risk or sacrifice to do as asked. So there's multiple stages of failure and success, and I think that's a really interesting idea. It's not just binary now; that there's a little bit of a gradient. And I think that's really cool, and I hope they expand that across multiple things. It seems like it just make the game more fun.
Sure. And again, it's another place where it's interesting because a DM is a part of the game and a character just like anyone else. And I don't see it as a power imbalance. I just see it as a unique type of role that also makes up the party. There are areas where you don't want to overstep and you want to let the DM be the DM.
Yeah.
This might be one of those areas where it's nice to add a little bit of guardrail.
Well, and there's so much. The biggest complaint I ever hear is that there aren't real rules to traps or making your own traps. And a lot of people are like, well, you're a DM, just make whatever trap you want. Like, I've tried to make puzzles and they're either stupidly easy or ignorantly hard,
Yeah.
where I'm like, I don't understand. We spent 2 hours on this and no one's getting it. And then I end up just being like, roll an intelligence check. And like, I rolled a 20. I'm like, cool, here's the answer. Right. And I think that the idea of like building and staging of success and fail is Wizards being like, hey, here's one way. Like, interacting with an NPC can be a puzzle. Let me show you like how your players can kind of do this on a scale. So I'm hoping that one of these is like traps. One of them is, yeah, just more of like how do my NPC or how do my characters involve working with NPCs? Like, again, you've played quite a bit of D&D with me at this point. I'm much better at building worlds and building encounters than I am role playing characters, right? It's
Sure.
just we all have different strengths, and this could help me, right? I could just be like, hey, what is my character? Okay, cool. They're definitely indifferent to this. Let's see what we can roll from there. So I'm all for these tools, like you were saying. Um, Next highlight, ritual casting. It's another case of after playing this game for 10 or 15 years, not knowing all the rules. I thought anyone could ritual cast. That when a spell could be ritual cast. Evidently, it's a feature of some classes. I play clerics for the most part, and they do have the feature of ritual cast. So I'd assume at one point in my life, I knew only certain people could ritual cast. Uh, but it's just cool to have a clarification, right? One of the benefits of this document for me is just to like fall in love with the rules of D&D. I think so often I haven't cracked up my DM's Guild book in forever,
Yeah.
right? Like it just doesn't get used, and this is making me like spend time read the rules again, be like, oh, like that little nuanced thing that I probably forgot about or haven't focused on is nice. So I'm appreciative of this document for many reasons. Another, again, search. And I think it was an idea in D&D, right? When do I use insight versus perception? And it was always like insight was mind, perception might be more environment. And they're just like ruling it out here, and they're adding medicine and survival. Like, what are the checks your character could want to do? Here they are, and here's what kind of skill you use for them. I think it's just like a really cool tool for the DM. I'm pumped on what they're doing here. I think that was the last highlight I have. Oh,
Okay.
one more. So again, I didn't actually do the research to check if this is real D&D 5th edition rules or not, but I dig it. The idea is if you have a proficiency, like with stealth, when you're lock picking, you get to add your proficiency bonus. But if you're also proficient with lock picking tools, you get advantage on it. And it's a cool way of just stacking and making sure that your character is super honed into being good at what you want them to be, right? Using your proficiencies on your tools, using your proficiencies on your abilities, and just like how do I best build this character to be super specific. So I'm gonna for sure now have advantage on some of my checks because this seems really smart.
Yeah.
And again, probably how 5th edition was played, and I just have been ignoring it forever.
So how has this update changed how you're feeling from last time we talked to this time? What's your overall feeling?
Yeah, so last time I was stoked on everything character related, and I think I still am. If anything, I really want to play with these characters now. Like I
Yeah.
want to either DM it or play it myself. Like just seeing how these new changes feel is really cool. There was much less kind of rule update on this one, and I think the rule update on the last one was our biggest kind of like because they just felt very weird, especially with the way they were handling flying, the way they were handling inspirations. There's just a whole bunch of little things that just felt super awkward and like not super great. Way less of that. And what we're seeing is that they also know, right? These are ideas. They're ideas that they need tested so that they can either throw them out or iterate on them. Even if there's a rule in here that everyone likes, we could definitely see a different version of it in the future, right? And as graphic designer, and I'm sure as you working with developers and working with teams, the creative teams, like you also probably appreciate this idea of like rapid iteration and quick to test. Like, let's get this thing out there, let's get it tested so that we can learn and not just be guessing or making decisions as like the most experienced D players for everybody.
Sure.
So the one thing I wanted to dive into real quick, if you guys haven't already downloaded this and checked it out, and you call yourself a D&D fan, I suggest you go over to D&D Beyond or just Google One DnD. You'll see it. You have to have a D&D Beyond account now, which we explained in the earlier one. D&D Beyond is going to be a bigger part of D&D if you like it or not. Um, But go and just look through this material and like try to play test it with your friends. Use this as an excuse to get a party in your house, right? And around a table. New stuff is exciting for everyone. And we just, before we judge it, hate it, or love it, we should try it out.
Yeah.
What that means for us in M of One and Lithana's Ring campaign is I'm currently rebuilding all of our custom backgrounds using the new rules. The smuggler background wasn't really all that impactful. Like I gave you a couple abilities, like your ability to like tool proficiency and stuff. But now, like the smuggler is going to put into your ability scores, like how do I make a smuggler feel as smugglery as possible? And this is really cool. I did it for the bounty hunter, and my page got all weird on the export. But you can also see here that I'm using some AI art to see if I can build out this better. Uh, who knows? We'll see if it works. But I also did the scavenger, and I think that's all working just really cool. And I'm pretty pumped on everything.
Great.
What are your thoughts with all this material and kind of how it's going to influence our games whenever we play?
I don't know that I have a good sense of it without just playing it.
Yeah, I think especially the first one, I was like, I could build the character in my head and be like, yeah, this is like rad. This fixes all the complaints I've had the last 2, 3 years. This one, and I think the reason you saw probably less highlights than the first set we went through is because so much of it's like, I don't want to have an opinion yet. Like, I want to
Yeah.
wait and try it, and then I can have like a real opinion. First off, it all looks cool. I'm not going to sit here and get angry at anything, but for now, like, let's hold harsh opinions.
I mean, realistically, it could be that the 98% feels roughly the same. So it's just, I mean, I obviously character setup's different, but once your party begins adventuring, I don't actually know how much I think this is going to affect the kind of livability. So I'll just wait and play.
Cool. So, in addition to all the initiatives we've seen with One DnD and all the cool stuff we're going to do with virtual tabletops and new character creations, D&D is also pushing a new initiative about getting into the classrooms. And what this article from Polygon does is it interviews a couple people, gets a couple people who work at Wizards to talk about it. But there's just an initiative of like, how can we start after school programs to aid kids in social aspects, math, reading, and all those other kind of soft skills, but also hard skills that D&D can foster.
Yeah.
Personally, when you sent it to me, I was like, this is really cool. And then as a professor of graphic design, I started thinking about like how schools just have no money for art supplies. And it felt weird that the resources for this might be being used. And like, where's this money coming from? Is it going to have teachers taking more money out of their own pocket to try to get
Right.
like books? But again, D&D was a huge part of my childhood and early college. And it helped me kind of make friends. It helps me maybe foster creativity. Maybe a lot of like why I did graphic design and art at all is probably partially because of D&D and other games like this. But you're the one who sent me this article today, and what did you think?
I mean, the initial thing is probably a bit like you. Initially, it sounds like an idea that's very logical. D&D, and much like other games, because this isn't the first time that a game has been seen as having like educational benefits or positivity, but teaches social skills or literature or math or certainly anything that involves imagination or just having community with other people. Like these are all very, very positive things. They can develop positive skills in a person, and you can have kids that would say, oh, but I just don't like reading, or
Yes.
I don't like math. But you give them something like this, and all of a sudden, like, you know, they want to, suddenly they have no trouble, like, consuming a book about this or role-playing in this environment. So there's something to be said for giving students something that can actually, like, pique their interest and appeal to them. The one thing I think that stands out to me maybe negatively, and maybe I'm a bit surprised about, because they specifically mention basically late elementary through middle school, like being for that young of an age. I think they mention all the way down to like 4th grade.
Yeah.
I'm just surprised that they kept the Dungeons and Dragons and the by Wizards branding and design and thematic elements. Because I feel like immediately 50% of parents just won't be comfortable and they won't let their kids interact with something like this.
Yeah, I didn't play D&D until I was 17. because my mom would not let us. And when confronted, be like, we were already playing Magic the Gathering, we were already playing Diablo on our computer,
Right.
but D&D is where she like crossed out.
Yeah.
And literally, when we were like, why? She's like, because I don't want you to kill me and dad. Like there was this idea that D&D would make you evil. Uh, my parents are both still alive. They're great.
Yeah.
Everything's fine.
And then
And
like
I'm making content.
wizardry is real, and you're gonna like a demon is gonna start living in your bedroom because
Yeah.
you opened yourself up to this. And
And if you do any research on like satanic panic, I mean, this wasn't just my parents. Like
sure.
this was everywhere. So I think I understand your thoughts on that. I would also love, and we're never going to get this because any D&D information we get is filtered through D&D.
Right.
Like even this article was half written by someone who works at D&D and be like, D&D can be educational. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, all right. Um, but I would love to know what is the kind of take on D&D now. There's an after school program one of my students run like volunteers at or works at after school, and they play D&D. Stranger Things had D&D. Critical Role is huge. There's a D&D movie coming out now, I think,
Yeah.
in like a year or two, starring Chris Pine, I believe. So like this is becoming more and more and more accepted. I wonder if there's any parents that are still on that satanic panic fear train.
I mean, there are going to be.
Yeah, of
It
course.
may be not classified under satanic panic, but even just given the percent of people, like in our country, we're obviously in the U.S., but the percent of people that would, profess some sort of like religion or
Sure.
association with a denomination, even just a large percentage of those people, this would be an immediate turnoff. And I'm not saying there's one side of like, don't bend and you don't cater to those people, blah blah blah, but I think there is another piece to say the framework that is this game
Mm-hmm.
can apply to things that is like you're being attacked by the stack of dirty laundry in the corner of your bedroom. Like you can apply all of the rules and all of the framework to a world that doesn't specifically have dragons or specifically have this imagery. The other piece of that is that this imagery isn't necessarily I obviously want to say this the right way, but maybe this imagery is considered like too masculine or too aggressive. Like we could have a couple of reskins that don't have to be that way. And the other piece of this is there are some people that play D&D campaigns where their goal is fighting. Let's roll initiative. Let's kill
Mm-hmm.
things. But there are some people that the joy that they derive from D&D is the role playing. It's telling a large story. It's spending it, hours of sessions just interacting with other NPCs and other characters in the environment. And so again, a bit of this feels in my opinion a bit too niche for the audience that are opening themselves up to. I would like to see maybe like a couple of reskins so that way there's something for everybody. And maybe that's something that exists. Maybe that's something that's there. But in all of this, because I looked at the educator resources page, I looked at the Polygon article, I looked at the other article, or the other website I'm blanking on. It was another educator resources page. But
Yeah.
they all showed the same monsters, the same dragons, the same Dungeons and Dragons, the wizards,
Well,
like all of that. And that's just surprising to me.
and like yeah, like you're saying, I have this picture up on the screen, which is a party like dancing out of the woods under a beholder that's kind of growling at them. And yeah, it's like how do we polish up these scary dark characters
Yeah.
for D&D? And it kind of goes back, I mean, again, and if you guys haven't watched the video we did first on the first content, we talked about Spelljammer and how it almost felt like they were doing that for adults as well with some of the imagery. Like, why is there a hamster now, and why is everyone like smiling and kind of like, ha ha? Yeah, it's just an interesting move. But we also have to remember, I believe it's Hasbro owns all this now, and Hasbro wants all the money they can get. So I'm sure there's some market research being like, this will work. And I guess on a darker note, I grew up very religious, hence the reason my mom would not let me play D&D, and I'm still quite religious. And when I think about like the dark tools Christians use to like get Christians, it's always like target the children. You get new Christians by targeting. And this feels sort of like a pamphlet for kids to like convert them to D&D. And it's just like super weird, like overall just like a weird Though if I was in high school, I would have been all over this material.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
I'm pumped on it. We're obviously we're making jokes, like kind of like dark, real jokes, but like it whatever they're doing is cool. I want more D&D players. I want more D&D content. So if this is how we get it, I'm down.
Sure. But maybe do a partnership with like Hello Kitty Island Adventure. That's okay.
Can
D&D can
you
be applied to other worlds. It's we can think of other things. Our imagination is without limit.
so that's actually and we're gonna go over time a little bit. We'll start cutting it soon. Um so D&D has the 5e edition rules, like the D20 rules, which are all open source. Anyone can use them. So what you see is a lot of fans doing IP driven content, like Avatar: The Last Airbender, 5e rules. Um, I wonder if D&D, Hasbro, Wizards are having an issue with this idea of are they pushing a rule set or an IP?
Yeah.
Right? Could they, like you're saying, build something that's a little bit more kid friendly with the rules to introduce them into that and then allow them to graduate to a newer, Dungeons and Dragons? I think that's a very interesting idea that probably many people aren't talking about because there's confusion of the difference, right? If you didn't grow up with D&D and you're not in it, you are thinking D&D is the rules, and there's a clear difference, and you could do an IP swap like you're saying.
Totally. And which is, I just think about what Andrew Kolb is doing with
Yeah.
Neverland or Oz with those settings that he's created. And I think that's a great example of how you can create a very vibrant world that that fully works with 5e, but you would describe as being like bright and whimsical and fun as
Right.
opposed to dark and menacing and whatever other words.
Well, and in the M of One Slack, if you guys aren't there, you should jump over. I think you can get a link from the website. Um, Someone shared just these like Disney playing cards that seem very Yu-Gi-Oh! Magic like. So we're only one step away from a Disneyland 5e
That's
campaign
true.
setting where maybe very Kingdom Hearts like. That could be cool. Like, yeah,
Some
I think
dark
all of
spirit
that.
has taken over Cinderella's castle, and we've got to go in and get it out.
Yeah, I think you are onto something that could both convert more people to be fans of D&D in the long run and be more acceptable.
Yeah, and just expand imagination of what you can apply. Again, that's the it kind of goes all the way back to the first question from when we started this video, which is how much of one D&D is meant to um
Bring in new
add
players.
new rules versus how much of one D&D is just meant to expand someone's idea of what can be acceptable, because sometimes we have problems with imagination.
Well, yeah, and it's also super interesting because um, the things we've been praising, or I've been praising so much, is the Dungeons and Dragons related stuff. And the stuff that I've been maybe more harsh on are the rules. So even in our discussions, you can see that these are two separate entities that we often see together. But man, I think when Wizards listens to this, because they will, we want some of that Disney
Yeah,
money when they
yeah,
when they make that partnership.
yeah. When you get goofy, throw us some money.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, for now, everyone should go to D&D Beyond, find the link to this material, and start reading it and playing testing it yourself. Join our Slack. Let us know what you've been experiencing with it. Leave your comments below if there were things that you liked in the rules or things that you didn't like. We can have that conversation here. We'll be back. Well, you will specifically be back on Monday on the Twitch network or the Twitch site
Yep,
for M of One Network for Pop Culture Roundtable.
that's true.
That's 7 p.m. CT, 8 p.m. ET?
You've said it correctly. Yes, it didn't sound like you did, but you did.
Perfect. Patrick, thank you so much for joining. I hope everyone enjoyed this content. If you did, we'll be back, I'm sure, with the next release.
Yeah.
Y'all have a
absolutely.
good day.
See everybody.